Hi, hello, I'm Janet J.M. Huxley with Color Speak. Thanks for joining us today. Today, my guest is Margaret Wacyk. Did I say that right? I did say that right, Margaret.
Yes, perfect.
And I am beyond thrilled to have her with us because today somebody is going to tune in that absolutely needs to hear what she has to say. In fact, what she has to say could change your life. I am so happy and I feel actually so loved by our God that he led me to Margaret
Oh,
because she is just spreading beauty and joy in the world. And she's doing it through music. And I think many of us don't even understand the ability that we have to gain healing and joy and knowledge through music. And I've written down her bio. I don't have a teleprompter, so bear with me. I just want to look down here at my notes and let me tell you, they are not comprehensive. So she starts out by saying, great music is a magnetic highway. We don't enter it to go somewhere bodily, but to take a journey of the soul. Margaret is, her background is legendary. She studied with legendary teachers at New York University and supplemented her studies in composition at Juilliard. Her original compositions were featured in the film The Lesson. She made her solo debut at Carnegie Hall in 2000, and from there, her accomplishments are actually too numerous to mention here. I was blown away. She's passionate about creating innovative programs that introduce new audiences to classical music and the powers of classical music, she writes. She has something called Golden Tone Workshops, which we're going to get to. And she talks about the seven sacred tones, Heaven's Melody, which is her goal is a revival of King David's method of worship. Now, if that isn't tantalizing, I don't know what is. So, welcome, Margaret. It is such an honor to have you with us.
thank you so much, Janet. What a thrill to be here. Such a blessing to meet you and such a blessing to be able to share with your community. I'm so honored. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. So, what did I miss? I know that, boy, we could take the next hour talking about all that you've accomplished. But before we get into the specifics of what you're doing for us these days, tell us about your family life. Do you have children? All of the things.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Janet. Yes, I have two children. They're grown up. One is 22 and working in a law firm in New York City right now in their HR department. And my younger one is junior year in college studying meteorology. I live
Ah,
in New Jersey with my husband, Mark, who, when I met him, I always joke he had the trifecta. He was a German atheist scientist, but by the time like we were like a few years into the marriage, we both became born again Christians, and it was just a wonderful thing. To have a partner that we can express our faith, and we also have a dog, a schnauzer named Coco, and a cat
oh,
named Gypsy. So, like, we have a full house, even though we're empty nesters. So,
oh, that is so sweet. I swooned a little because my first dog's name was Coco.
oh
And
my
I've
gosh,
long
it's
thought,
funny.
I've had a lot since her, but I've often thought if I get another dog, I'd like to maybe call her Coco.
Oh, yeah, Coco is, I had Coco Chanel in mind when we were picking out the name, and
I love it.
she's more like Coco. I'm dirty, and I'm, just
Yeah.
gonna scrape around looking for, bones in the middle of the mud. So she's a little bit not as glamorous as the name suggests, but a great dog nonetheless.
Well, I live on a farm, so there's no glamour in our dogs here. It is what it is. But I do like, I was thinking cocoa chocolate, but I do like that other idea because my favorite fragrance is by Chanel and it is Entendre. It's
Oh,
pink.
that's a different
Beautiful.
one.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. It
Ooh.
doesn't feel like something that was dredged up from the Steamboat Arabia. So I say that tongue in
Ooh.
cheek. The Steamboat Arabia is an old steamer that was found embedded in the Missouri River here just outside of Kansas City, or I think it's actually in Kansas City proper. And they found vials of perfume that were 150 years old, and
Oh,
pickles too. And one of the guys ate them. One of the guys that was in charge of the dig or owned the dig or whatever. Anyway, I always kiddingly think about my grandmother's Estee Lauder
oh
and how
yes.
powerful that was.
Oh,
And
the
yeah,
fragrance.
yeah. So anyway,
The
going.
fragrance is everything. It's funny that you say this because last year we went to Paris, and one of the absolute stops that I had to make was a little atelier where they recreate historical fragrances. And they were able
Ooh.
to find a little vial that Chopin, the great composer, he had his girlfriend was George Sand. That was her pen name because at that
Mhm.
time, you're a writer. But imagine, it's like 1830. You can't really, as a woman,
Oh,
write.
sure. Right.
And so she
Yeah.
took on this pseudonym, George Sand, and so she was such an expressive writer, and so they would walk these gardens together. She was so entranced by fragrance all the time, and so she had collected all her favorite scents, and she wore them on a little vial, which was discovered by one of her great great grandchildren, and they recreated it. And so I was able to buy it and take it home, and I wear it every day, and it's so wonderful just to have that fragrance, like you say, like somehow through all these, like over a century, is still like bonds us.
It
There's nothing
does.
quite as fragrance to bring you back to that memory. Sound and fragrance, it's like the same kind of wavelengths that just get our hearts those emotions right away.
I agree. It transcends time because
It
I
does.
have not only my grandmother's fragrances and a vial that belonged to my great grandmother, but one of those little boxes with a cameo on it, and it still has a scent in it. And that is lovely. It kind of reminds me of my own daughter, Emily, now. She's all about essential oil, and she carries a variety with her all of the time. She's got her essential oils in her car and on her person at all times.
Oh, it's
And
powerful
isn't that
stuff.
lovely? Yeah, I think it's great. Isn't that funny that we ended off in the fragrant weeds on this, but I agree.
Isn't
This is awesome.
I love the scripture with the word fragrance in it. How does the beginning go? Praise be to God who leads me in triumph and through me spreads and makes evident the fragrance of the knowledge of God everywhere. And I love how fragrance is just wafting through. It's not something concrete and hard and like, left brained. It's just, ooh, the
Yes.
flow, the scent, the beauty, the essence of the Holy Spirit.
Yes. That's to be celebrated. How
Yes,
lovely.
yes.
Well, and I just think about some of those authors who have written about experiences where the veil thins.
Hmm.
Reggie Anderson is one that comes to mind. He wrote a book called Appointments with Heaven. And he's a physician down in Nashville, in that area, in Tennessee anyway. And he writes about what it's like when he sees the passing of patients who follow Jesus. And when the veil thins, there are scents of citrus and lavender. Just when you imagine the greatest, for me, I imagine honeysuckle
Ooh,
and
one of my favorite scents.
those
Okay.
kinds of
Yeah.
scents. And I've done some work writing about this. As I mentioned, I'm sort of waiting on this project that has been completed for a couple of years now, waiting to see what will happen about it. But I write about this. I just love it. I'm fascinated. So it stands to reason we would bring fragrance in with music.
I love
Music
that. I
is
got goosebumps just listening to that. Oh my gosh. I have to
it's
look up this what is the name of that? But Reggie.
called Reggie. His name is Reginald Anderson, and I can't remember whether he writes under Reggie Anderson or Reginald Anderson. It's
Okay.
called Appointments with Heaven.
I love
And
that's
it's
my next book.
fascinating. It's fascinating, but here's what's equally fascinating. And let me just tell you this real fast. It's so funny. Hopefully, all of this is edifying for people. But I had picked up the book just on a whim. I think I found it at a bookstore, and I was reading it. And my husband said he designs water parks for a living. So we were going to actually fly down to the Bahamas for one day. We had a Friday we were leaving. We were going to be in the Bahamas on Saturday so he could check out a project. And then we were flying back on Sunday. And I had this book and I couldn't stop reading it. So I was reading it on the plane on the way there. And then on Saturday, I'm in the hotel room and I'm reading the book and I can't put it down. And he's
Wow.
waiting on me. And he says, you think you might want to step outside because we're only here for a day? And I said, I can't put this book down. So I finished it. And then he read it on the plane on the way home because he
Oh
was,
my goodness. It was that
well,
good. You can't put it
as soon as the plane landed, he was ordering books from Amazon, to be delivered because he felt like he really wanted to give them out to people. And so I've given those out to people to encourage them when people have passed away in their lives, because it is so profound. But here's the interesting thing I have to tell you. So halfway through it, I was thinking, well, this is really great for those who know Christ, but what happens when someone doesn't? And he addresses that too, and what that was like. Completely different. Room gets cold, smell of diesel and sulfur. Not good. Not good. It's just further testimony of, I mean, he doesn't belabor that. That's just pretty much from my recollection. It's been years since I've read the book, but I feel like it was maybe one isolated incident that he talked about.
Wow.
Most of it is celebrating what happens when you know Jesus, but people know Jesus.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
just wild to me that
Oh,
people choose
that's
not to.
I've never heard anything like this information, using those senses. I think, you know, this we have five senses. We're so visually oriented most of the time, right? And I think like fragrance, even I was reading an article about perfumers. That's such a very, very small industry. Like you have the
Mhm.
nose, like, if you have a great sense of the craft, then you are able to really like work in a very, very niche field. But very few people attain that. And I don't even think there are that many even jobs in that particular segment. But it is something so special. And I always think like we could shut our eyes, we can plug our nose and not smell. Um, we can shut our mouth and not taste. We can hold our hands and, clenched and not touch, but we could never shut off our ears. And the hearing is actually the first sense that is developed in utero, 4 months, and it's the last sense to leave us. So I think that's so interesting that
Hmm.
this sense of hearing not only is the one that God made first and continued the longest through a human lifespan, but also that is mentioned many, many, many times in the Bible. Like I forgot the number, but it's more than even sight. It is about hearing, and Shema, which is the Hebrew word is hearing, but not just as a passive act. It means listen and obey. Like it's an action verb.
Mhm.
Do something with this. Don't just allow. And I think we live in a world where it's such a noisy world. We can't really shut it off. And the things that we can do are to be very intentional with what we let in. The ear is such a gateway for the spirit. Even the way
Yes.
we're designed is
Mhm.
that the minute that things hit our ear, it becomes energy that the body uses. And because we have the vagus nerve, which runs through our ear canal, and the vagus nerve controls everything from our digestion, our heart rate, breathing patterns, nervous system. So truly our fuel is not just food, but it's essentially sound. What we hear, the words we hear, the music we hear, it all becomes energy. And so it's very, very powerful and interesting.
Hmm. Thank you so much for that and for bringing me back around from the sense to the hearing, because that's what we want to talk about today. I tend
No,
to
I
go,
could, I could go
I
on
tend,
and on about fragrance too. It's a passion of
no,
mine.
no, yeah, no, but it's so funny because at first I was thinking, you know how you and I prayed before this, and Holy Spirit is leading. So I was thinking, oh, he definitely wants us to touch on this. But okay, let's get back to the matter at hand. I want to know how, okay, so you must have grown up with the, some of us are just wired. I told you earlier, I really appreciate people who can do what you do because
Hmm.
I can't. Now, I know how music makes me feel. And sometimes, even people like me, I think this is true of, when we hear music, it makes us feel like we are the only one on the planet, the only one
Mhm.
that truly understands what music does for us and who God is through music. I mean, there's something
Right.
that's so supernatural to experience
Yes.
it that even those
Yes.
of us who can't carry a tune and don't play an instrument,
Doesn't matter.
um, it resonates with us.
Absolutely.
So you must have, from a very early age, I mean, my goodness, you went to Juilliard and you've played at Carnegie Hall. I would think if anybody was an expert on music, this is you. And what you're speaking about is how music was designed by God to heal us. How did that first come about for you?
It's very interesting. I was born to Polish parents, and although neither of my parents played or were involved in classical music, my paternal grandmother was a pianist in Poland, and she lived through the war, and so she always was a proponent for my piano playing. And so I was studying music from an early age, and I was a very shy child and a very sensitive child. So if I would see anything that, like once we were driving in a car and I saw, the remnants of a car accident, well, I couldn't sleep for about 2 weeks after that.
Oh
It
my
would just,
goodness.
yeah,
Yes, that's me. I saw a
really.
dog hit by a car. Oh my gosh. Yeah,
I
same.
mean, it's
Yeah.
such a, and I used to think like, is this normal? Like to be so hypersensitive to stuff. It was very difficult to live like that in a way because you never knew when something would affect you on a deep level. But I do think that translated itself to a very strong sensitivity to music and sound, because that was another thing that I realized. It wasn't just the visual, it was the sound of something that could either disrupt your day and bring you into a certain kind of trauma,
Mhm.
or it can do the opposite. It can lift you, it can take you out of the world and into another. And so when my first piano teacher gave me a recording of Chopin, she gave me one by a great pianist named Arthur Rubinstein, and my parents had one at home by Van Cliburn, and I love them both, but it was the Rubinstein one. Just I really loved it more, and I couldn't tell why I did, but every time I listened to the music, I just felt like it brought me to heaven. I don't know how to explain. I couldn't understand how somebody could even conceive of these sounds coming together and making such harmonies and such stories with music and sound. It was really a treasure to me. Well, uh, although I did end up playing in Carnegie Hall, making my New York debut, it was not an easy road. Along that time, I had to I lost the ability to play. I was beaten down psychologically by a lot of teachers, and being hypersensitive, that really affected me deeply, and things. And so I had to rebuild my technique. And along that path and journey, God showed me something called the golden tone technique, which was connecting to music via tone. Tone, like people, we talk about tone of voice, and tone of voice is everything, right? Because we can say something like, you know, uh, you know, uh, I don't even know, like, how are you today? And that tone is like, oh, like, hey, we're going to be positive. Or you could be like, well, how are you today? Like, and then right
Well,
away, it's a different
yeah, I
state.
was just going to say, you know what the best example of that is with your animals.
Yes.
because like
Yes.
sometimes I'll be on the phone with one of my kids and I'll react, in fun. We're just kidding around, but the dog's ears will go up like
Oh,
in
it's
an
so
alarm, in an
true.
alarmed manner. But if you
Yeah.
look at a dog and say, "Oh, how you doing, little sweetheart?" Well, then
Oh,
all of a
it's
sudden they're
different.
wagging their tail and everything's
Amazing.
great. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. You're so right. You're so right, Janet. It's the animals that are so pure and they understand tone. And
Mhm.
even like my dog, so my dog was limping years ago. This is not Coco. This was another dog. We had Sonia, named
Oh,
after Sonia from from one of my favorite books, Crime and Punishment. We were
nice.
talking about classic literature. So
Love it.
Sonia was limping, and like the doctor said she would always limp and everything else. And this is after I started researching, because I've always had an interest in, okay, tone, because tone was what rehabilitated me and got me playing piano again. And tone was what got me to the concert stages, connection with the essence of sound and beauty of sound, stripping it from all the, speed and digital, like blah, 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 and, the pressure of classical music, and just to that pure, like we're talking about essence of fragrance, the fragrance of a note. One
Mm,
note you can play on the piano and it can be such an experience, because a note goes through a whole life cycle. You play one note and there's that preparation for the birth of this note, and what's it going to sound like. It's such a, you internalize that, you make it an intention, and then you have to release that intention. Lord, what shall this be? So it's a co-creative process. And then there's the creation of the note, the new birth, and the note on the piano, unlike other instruments like a violin, you can still maintain that note and you can increase the duration of that note. But with the piano, it's like a rose at full bloom. It's just going to start decaying after
mm.
that. So the sound starts to fade away. And so now you have to prepare yourself for listening through that decay. And if there's another note that's coming right after it, you have to now imagine, okay, so in that dovetailing, how do I want the next note to go into this note? So for me, that rehabilitation was going away from the legalism of classical music. It has to be note perfect. It has to be fast. It has to be better than this or that performance. And that was really that was like a form of slavery, taking it away from there and going into the creative, that moment of creation of a note. And it's a healing process where you realize, okay, now we are playing music in cooperation with heaven, and it's such a different feeling. It's such a different experience. For audiences, it's a different thing, because we're all in this together. I just recently played a concert 2 weeks ago, and I I am always amazed what the Lord does in the sound realm. If you have sound and you marry it with intent, something quite amazing happens where you feel like you're almost breathing together. You're collectively having this experience of heaven together. And you could hear the sighs of people as like they're listening and they're living that note in you and through you. And really it's in the Lord, because the Lord is the conductor of all these things. So it's a powerful, powerful thing. Tone is.
Wow. So I don't think I've ever had anyone explain music to me that way. And I just am sitting here marveling at not only the talent that you have on the keyboard, but the talent that God has bestowed upon you to describe it in poetic wording. I mean, that
Mm.
was such a beautiful melody that you created with just words that
Thank you
had us
so
all thinking about that note and visualizing it. And I think I wish I had had a piano teacher that had explained music that way to me. As I shared with you earlier, I took piano lessons and quit. And I had a little choir experience, but I never really pursued music because I feel like my judgment regarding music was clouded by what was being pumped in through a certain frequency on the radio where I grew up in San Diego, which is, fodder for another topic, a day of discussion and what that looked like. But I feel like we as a society have been deprived of
Yes.
our
Yes.
God-given right and the beautiful gift that he has given us through music. And I think that's through no fault of our own necessarily. I think that we bear some responsibility, of course, not suggesting otherwise. But I do think that our society at large has been one to laud those things that are unbeneficial for us.
Correct.
And to be honest, I think that that's largely intentional. I remember even just a year ago or so asking my chiropractor, I said, "Do you believe in frequencies? And what do you think about it?" And because he's very holistic. And he said, "Well, there's no mistaken. There is a reason why there is a certain segment of the population that is prone to violence and drug usage and whatnot because of the music they listen to."
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So circling
Absolutely.
back around to what you've just said, it's just, it, I think we all need to really marinate in what you said because it does have the potential to be life changing.
It
Because
is
I
like,
know when my kids were little, I had them listen to Mozart because I knew
yes,
Mozart was good for them.
yes.
Did I really understand all of it, that you've just so beautifully put in a little?
Oh, Janet, and you know what? You have such a discernment about this topic and a sensitivity to it. But if I may, there is something all of us can do and tap into the power of sound right now, wherever we are. And that is something that sometimes people call it toning. I really don't know. It's something really, really grounding. And it's a very simple thing we can all do because you're absolutely right. The music realm has been hijacked. But if we think about it, who is the angel, the fallen angel?
Yep.
Satan is the angel of music. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
why this is a contentious territory, music
Sure
is.
it is.
And so, of course, wouldn't it make sense to fill the airwaves with fear,
Mm.
anger, and very low level frequencies and
Mhm.
chaos, like the Tower of Babel? God teaches us in that the power of frequency. If we make it chaotic, we are behaving in a chaotic fashion. We have all this stuff going on, like 5G, and we have like things around us, invisible waves that are constantly bombarding us, not to mention sound and all sorts of things. But how can we ground? How can we tap in to our frequency? Because all of us have a frequency. I think every day our frequency is different. Where is the Lord tuning us? Because the Lord is the conductor and we are the strings. We are the strings. The Lord is the
Mhm.
tuner and we're the strings. So here's a simple practice that I do every day. And I find the shower to be a great place to do this just because it's echoey and there's water, which acts as a conductor for this energy. But it's very simple. And in your prayer time, in connecting with the Lord, you simply ask for the tone, the sound. Lord, what sound shall I echo that is the sound in your heart for me?
Hmm.
And you
That's
let it come and you let it well up. And whatever that is, you just sing it. It could just be, say, la, whatever, it is. So, like, for instance, Lord, what is the sound, Lord, in your heart for me today? And I'll take a deep breath. And I'm not a singer. So, whatever comes out is just like truly just from the inside. La. And as you sing it, you direct that energy to any place that you might be feeling, maybe like you're upset about something. So direct it to that place in your heart. Maybe you're not feeling 100%. Direct it to that place in your body. Perhaps you've got something big going on that day, an important meeting or an interview or something. Direct it to that. The thing is, even Einstein said that match the thing you want with the frequency and you cannot help but have it. Even Einstein, through physics, understood the principles. But how much more can we understand through the Lord in this, that grants us this through the Holy Spirit when we
Mhm.
pray?
Mhm.
And we have this capacity inside us. We don't even need an instrument because the Lord has given us the voice to do it. And so it's different for each and every one of us. Why? The scripture says we are all members of one body. But, the eye doesn't look at what, the foot has, and vice
Mhm.
versa. We have our own sound. And once we tap into it, oh my goodness, um, we are at a different, we tune ourselves, we get
Mhm.
ready for the day, and we're able to face it in a different wavelength than what the world says.
That was so beautiful. And I'm wondering what the frequency of gratefulness is, because before you even did your note, I feel like that was the same note I was hearing when
Oh
you
my
suggested
goodness.
that. Now, here's the thing. I have
Wow.
never done this before. I've never heard anybody suggest it before. This is brand new. This is so organic right now. So you're telling me this and I'm thinking it and you said la. I was thinking, that's what I was thinking.
Amazing. Amazing.
And
Amazing.
I felt like, I honestly felt like I was going to start crying. I don't know. Was it because I'm ultra sensitive too, or is it because it reached a part of me that just felt like really cleansing? And again, I can't underscore enough the fact that this is why I love watching shows where people, are musically gifted and can sing, because I just stand in such awe because it's not what I can do. And like you said, I understand I'm just a piece of the puzzle and I offer something that somebody else, we're all so unique. So I never bemoan the fact that I can't. I celebrate the fact that I can't by enjoying the fact that someone else can, if that makes sense.
And the fact that we all not only have it in us, the capacity to create with sound. We all have it, no matter what the lies of the world have told us.
Mm.
Those lies, again, those don't come from God, because God made us, you know, he put a new song in our heart. What does that mean? Does that mean, Lord, that I have to be a singer in order to enjoy this new song? No. It just means that that we can interact, create with sound, no matter the level. I cannot sing for beans. I really, honestly, I cannot even sing happy birthday in pitch. Like, it's so bad, Janet. I am not a singer. But when it comes to this toning technique that I do, like in my private prayer time, you know what? There is no singer out there that can help me to feel the way I feel when I connect with the Lord in that sound realm. And the Lord gives me the tone for that moment. I have been able, like, through this, I mean, I've had some personal testimonies of just, like, for instance, one time I woke up and I had a really bad infection. This was actually a few times it's happened. I had throat infection, I had a UTI, and I didn't want to take the antibiotics. And so I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, can you give me the tone for that? And the Lord gave me the tone. And I just did the la thing. I just, sang the la. But an important part of it is I focused on that area that needed healing. I think that
Mhm.
that's a very important second part. It's not just the frequency, what the sound is, but it's the intent. You have to marry those two equally together. And
Wow.
literally both things went away. I do this with headaches, I do this with all sorts of ailments, and I've been able to stave off flus and all these things. It's because everything comes down to frequency. It's and a frequency, just because it's like kind of one of these words that we could use but sometimes be confused. What does that mean? All it
Right.
means is how fast, like when we sing, how fast you could feel your throat vibrating. So the higher the sound, the faster it's vibrating, the lower it's vibrating, and that's simply it. But only the Lord could decide, because like there are a gazillion speeds, right? So the Lord gives the speed, and we just do it. And in the beginning was the Word, right? And
Right. I've always said
right,
that. The word. He didn't wave his magic wand or wave his hands or any of that. He
yes,
spoke everything into creation. There
correct,
was a vibration there. The
yes.
vibration of creation, which is only him.
And
That's
in
wild.
one, it's an amazing thing. I think in the Gospel of Matthew, if I'm not mistaken, it's only one gospel where it says that at the end of the Last Supper, when the Last Supper was finished, right before Jesus left to go to the Garden of Gethsemane, he sang. I mean, what did that sound like?
Wow.
I would love to. I mean, imagine
I
hearing
missed
Jesus
that.
sing.
Wow. That's important information.
It is important
Why do
information.
so this is a thing that blows my mind. So, okay, we talk about the world at large and all the things that have been kept from us, and we're all beginning to understand as the Lord is awakening his planet
Yes,
over
yes.
the past 3 years. And I think and I've said it and I'll say it again. It's like we've all been living in the Truman Show. But I think we don't like to what degree? Every single thing from the food we eat to the clothes we wear to, the medicine that we take. And now to learn it's vibrations that we listen to. All of it is either harmful or beneficial.
Well, it's true. And even food, like, okay, I'm not saying organic food, this is not a judgment or a statement that one type of food is better than another. But one thing is for sure, the act of praying over food changes its composition.
It
And that's
does.
that's been
Yeah.
documented.
Yeah.
And even singing to water, if you sing or say Jesus to water, it changes its
Mm, love it.
structure. And so there was a famous Japanese scientist by the name of Dr. Emoto, Masaru Emoto. He did amazing experiments, and he would make a batch of rice. He would put one batch in a jar and put it, um, on one side of the room, the other to the other side of the room. Both areas in the room were the same, so they got equal amount of light and all this stuff. But one big difference, to one of them, he would go and say, "I hate you." Evil, like, just these terrible words, hate,
Mhm.
destruction. To the other one, he would go and say, "Love, you are beautiful. I am
Mhm.
grateful." And do you know, within days, the one that he was speaking the hateful things to, it started to mold and get black and decay and get weird, like right away. Whereas the one that he spoke love and kindness and gratitude to, that rice kept going strong, white, didn't get molded for days upon days upon days. So, really, there's so much science out there that proves that you know, that our words have life or death, because, life and death is in the power of the tongue, the word
Exactly.
says.
Mhm.
And the power of our thoughts, the frequency, the higher the frequency of our thoughts and emotions, those are the ones of love, right? Those are getting us up there. And sound is the same.
Mhm.
There's some sounds we can hit that, we are feeling, different. And our body is reacting to this. Our whole body is like one big string. And if you can imagine that, when we are listening to beautiful things and not just great music, and by great music, I'm going to go out on a limb, even though I know that I get bashed for saying this because, I say classical music is the most highly organized and also intentional for Christian, because it takes its cue from the early church music, and
Mhm.
that is why. And so when you listen to the beautiful music of Bach or Mozart or Beethoven, then we are really able to elevate. Even bird songs, listening to nature outside, taking a walk, that does so much good for our
It
nervous
does.
system,
Yeah.
right? So,
So I'm glad because I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to explore that with you. That you talk about what music was like in King David's temple. And I had my friend Missy Maxwell Wharton, I shared with you, and she's been on the podcast. She is a singer. She was a backup singer for Garth Brooks. She lives in Nashville and she's now an author and leads others in writing. But she really knows her frequencies. And
ooh,
so she had brought that up too, that we know what the frequencies were in the temple. And of course, as the old journalist in me, I had to ask, well, how do we know that? Because I don't know. I mean, I'm not a singer. I'm not a musician. And she says, because we know what the frequency of the harp is. We know what the frequency of those instruments was. Can you speak into that? Because I know that's part of your message too, in the heavenly tones you talk about. We've gotten away from that. We've gotten away
yes.
from worship the way it should be.
Right, right. Well, two things about that. I mean, I think that we've gotten away from that because according to the early church music tradition, it was very powerful. And so if we imagine the time, from Acts onwards as the early church started, then you always had this music, but it was music that's passed on from one generation to another. It wasn't written down. It was an oral tradition of music making. And so when we get further on into the early centuries and Gregorian chanting, and you hear
Mm.
that a lot, and the power of this. Well, this was all part of, again, control and power, because really when the musicians would sing with all their heart and using those historical ways from the early church, there were instantaneous, miraculous healings going on. Like people would just it was a constant supernatural event. But then, like, how do you follow that up? Like the pastors or the priests in those early days were very intimidated because, the musicians were able to do all this through the power of God. And so there was a threat. And so there were a lot of this core about the power of these frequencies. And not only, I also think it's not only the frequencies, but it's also the melodies, the harmonies. Those things also were kind of really important, because one thing we know from the tabernacle of King David, that King David was first and foremost, he was a worshiper, right? And it was his skill on the harp that brought him from the pasture to the palace of King Saul. And we also have this understanding that it was the power of the anointed sound that David was given that drove away the demons from King Saul and made David so powerful at the time. So, and then we get to the days where now David is assembling the musicians and the music making for the tabernacle. Well, one thing we know is that it was not a haphazard thing. It was extremely organized, and every singer, every sound, it was premeditated. It had to be. And it was, and our Lord is one of pattern. It's nothing is random, nothing is chaotic. And
Mhm.
music also reflects divine order and divine patterning. So David knew this through the anointing he had. And so even in the tabernacle, as long as the music was played 24/7, there was a supernatural hedge. There was no illness, there was no strife. people just enjoyed kingdom on earth. And it was so pure and so powerful. So a lot has been lost. And so what brought me to this quest to figure out a little bit more about tabernacle worship, early church music, was the composer J.S. Bach. And in 2013, I was making a recording of Bach's music. And it was funny, as I was preparing for this recording, the Holy Spirit would visit me all the time. And I had to have a notebook next to me by the piano, because I would be practicing and then I'd have to stop and write down whatever the Holy Spirit was showing me. And the Holy Spirit would show me, go and research this, go find this piece of information out, go get this. And so Bach, who was born in 1680, he was probably he wrote the greatest music ever written because of its complexity, of its perfection. People might like it, people might not like it. It has nothing to do with personal opinion. It has everything to do with the complexity, the harmony, and the absolute perfection of craft that he achieved. And that was only through the Lord. And so he wrote, everything he wrote would be perfect, like as if we were talking about divine downloads before. He got a divine download every single time. He would write the letters JJ at the beginning of every piece of music, which stood for, in the Latin, Jesus help, Jesu Juvi. And then at the end, he would like write, it would be perfect. Like every note was perfect and complex, and so complex. It's like if you had the greatest chess champion playing simultaneous like 25 games of chess and winning every single one, that would not even qualify the genius that it took for Bach to compose on such a high level as he did. It's such anointed music that it's the only music that you can play underwater on a speaker and have whales swim in from miles upon miles, and their connection to this frequency of God is so strong. They will swim for miles and they will create a pod around this music. But they've tried other music, it doesn't work. It's only for Bach. So at the end of every composition, Bach wrote the words, the letters SDG, for God alone the glory. He didn't want to take any credit for it. So as I'm preparing his music and the Lord is asking me to go and research these things, one of the things that I was researching was tuning of instruments that Bach used. And tuning was a big subject back in the day. It was very important. It's not talked about much anymore about how important it is to tune. But historically speaking, tuning was a very, very big thing. And it's known that even in the early empires of China, that the area was too big for certain dignitaries to go visit and to investigate, and because the emperor would want to know, like, how are they doing in these provinces? Can you go and give me a full report? Well, it would be really hard to get a full report, but the way that they did get the full report, and it was always right, they would go to the village and they would first thing ask to hear the music. What music are you playing in this village? And they would listen to the tunings of these instruments, and that told them everything. Because the idea was, if everyone is in tune and in the right tune, then there's harmony, there's prosperity, there's alignment. But if there was something off, if there was a new element added, then that would that would just automatically mean there would be problems, destruction, and trouble ahead. So people
Well,
were
can I
very
say something? That to me is just fascinating. And I'll just admit, so I was hearing an interview the other day. I don't watch CNN, but I did happen to come upon an interview where a CNN reporter was interviewing Zelensky, the from Ukraine, and
Mhm.
she asked him what he was listening to, what was his favorite music, and he said AC/DC. And I know I thought the same thing. I thought, well, there you have it. Like, it makes so much sense, right? Yeah.
Garbage in, garbage out. Sorry.
Right. 100%. That's a great story.
That's
Yes, I
crazy.
totally believe that. You really are a product of what you listen to and
You
what
are.
you see and a lot of other things, but
You are.
it's so
Yes.
important.
It's everything. It's everything, especially,
Yeah.
guard your heart and mind. The word says, especially now, it's a fight. It's a fight for
Mhm.
our children's hearts and
Oh, it
minds
sure
each and
is.
every day against what the
Right.
social media is telling them and what the world is saying and the guarding of the heart and mind, and if we really realize and take this power back for ourselves,
Mhm.
even in that small but big act of singing sounds in cooperation with the Lord and the Holy Spirit, well, then we are really protecting our hearts, we are protecting our minds against the
Mhm.
onslaught, because it
Mhm.
is a war. We are out there, we are, and we're the sheep, but we only hear the shepherd's voice, like
Mhm.
shepherd, right? The sheep, they
Right.
only listen to the shepherd's voice. So we'll
Mhm.
gain discernment the more that we reconnect with our origin sound, our origin story. Like, as children of the Most High,
Mhm.
I am sure that when we were like in our pre-birth state, I'm sure that in our mom's wombs we were listening to the music of heaven, we were communicating, singing with the Lord. I mean, that's
Mhm.
what whales do. Mama, and baby gets separated by, like, some horrible story. How do they communicate? um Through sound. They
Mhm.
know, they recognize each other through sound. We are in constant communion with the Lord through sound, but we got to activate it. And we all have a responsibility to do that, each and
Right.
every one of us. And it's no longer, we're not musical, we're not, we're tone deaf. It's garbage. How could any one of us be tone deaf when the Lord made us out of tone?
Well, I mean, as I've had already admitted, I don't have any experience in it, but I know how music makes me feel. And I know how my God will communicate. There's it's a discernment issue too. You know, you ultimately you know what the best decision is for you and your well-being. You know what you should be putting
Yeah,
in, garbage out.
right.
Or how about healing in? How about beauty? How about joy? How about love?
Yes,
All of those
yes.
things that can be found through music. I think it's more important now than ever. And that's really what my aim has been lately as I think about how we're negotiating these times. And really, it's not so much I think of it as negotiation. I think of it as how do we experience abundant joy that we're called to experience it right now in anticipation of what he's doing next. And I believe that what he's doing next is going to be fantastic. And here's why. Because gone are the days that we have to believe everything that we're told. We have been through all of the suffering and the chaos, all of it over the past few years for a purpose. And that
Hmm.
purpose is to awaken us to potential, awaken us to what we can experience, what life can look like, with the shroud taken off of our from over our heads and
Yes.
from the binding that's been placed around us. We can experience everything that God has for us. And what I love about what you just said is I always marvel. I mean, I guess it's the writer in me, and I used to teach high school literature. I really love allegory and everything. And people have sometimes laughed at me. Okay, you're the writer, you're going to see allegory and everything. But there is allegory in everything that God does too. So you've just mentioned the sheep and the goats. So I live on a farm. We have goats. We used to milk goats here and make cheeses and soaps and all of that. People have long asked me, what do you think God was talking about when he was talking about separating the sheep from the goats? Now, listen, I love my goats. My goats have been used over the centuries. The goat head, the connotations there, obviously, notwithstanding. Goats are a really lovely, fun animal, and they produce. And on the farm, they've been certainly enjoyed by my kids. But we have this very real picture that Christ creates for us in Scripture, separating the sheep from the goats. And I've always said, you're right. I said sheep will only listen to the voice of their master, whereas goats will listen to anybody. I mean, once they
Mm,
hear a human's voice, if they've been used to being fed and interacted with, goats will absolutely follow whoever has the grain, right?
wow.
Whoever promises them whatever they're looking for, instant gratification. Years ago, we had, as a prank, some high school boys decided they were going to steal our goats and place them strategically in different places around the small town nearby where we lived.
Wow.
And I always wondered, well, how on earth? Like there was one that I had, Victoria. We found her down near the railroad tracks, and we ended up getting them back. It was a little problematic, obviously, and not just a bit heart wrenching.
Oh,
But I always wondered, well, how did Victoria follow these dudes in the middle of the night? Um, it was
yeah.
because they're always interested. Oh, humans provide grain, so we're going to follow those humans. We're going to. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I've always thought of it in those terms, which I think are still accurate. But you've added a new allegorical dimension today because you're absolutely right. We not only hear his sound, the sound of his voice. There's a tuning. There's a frequency that we follow as his that
Yes.
allows us to follow him. No wonder there's going to be separation from those who
Yes.
choose to hear the voice of deception versus the voice of truth. And
Yes.
and this lovely frequency that
Yes.
frequencies because as you mentioned too, yeah, I mean we all have our own frequencies. He has his own frequency. The angels have theirs, so on and so forth in the supernatural world. And I've
Absolutely.
learned recently, and this is the wildest thing. So I shared with you, my daughter Rachel is pregnant with a daughter. She and her husband are expecting in June. So we've
Oh,
been baby shopping. And I'm over here looking at all the tags now and thinking, well, because even frequencies are come in clothing and fibers. So, and the
yes.
Bible
Oh,
speaks
sure.
to this, don't combine linen and wool. And we always thought,
Yeah.
well, that's kind of a weird, obscure verse and it doesn't apply to me. Well, it's entirely applicable
Yes.
because wool has a frequency of 5,000, linen has a frequency of 5,000. Together, they're negated. And so
Yes.
when you wear linen or you wear wool or hemp or organic cotton, particularly, those things can be very beneficial. And just try it. Like since we're on the subject of frequencies and not to delve too far into the clothing realm, I decided instead of wearing like a camisole that I've always worn, made of spandex or whatever, just that I thought was functional, I intentionally went out and bought an Egyptian cotton black camisole to wear under clothing one day. And I thought, I wonder if it'll make a difference. And I thought, oh my gosh, I feel so much better today. Like I was on my feet
Oh,
all day and I felt like it made a difference, people. I'm
oh,
telling you, it's crazy. So I'm
completely.
looking forward to a day where clothing is produced differently and it's made available at a reasonable price for everyone, for all people in all walks of life. And here we are with the music element. And so just hearing that we can, from you, Margaret, we can even we can do our own tuning inwardly every
No,
day.
that's so
That's
well put,
fantastic.
Janet. We can do our own tuning. Just to speak to your point about clothing and frequency, that's another really super important subject. One of the things I've been an avid knitter for about 25 years in my life, and last year I started a business of knitwear, and so I dye the yarn, I get the wool and everything, and it's so true. Like even the process,
Wow.
I made this, for
I was
instance,
going to ask.
and I dyed the wool for it.
Wow.
Like the process of making it is so interesting, like dyeing the colors and and I am always amazed at what the Lord shows like through this process of color, which every color also, I mean, you talk about colors
Mhm.
speak, and I love that you bring color into this in this beautiful, like you say, like this it's storytelling that we are all colors, and colors all have different frequencies and shades and meanings. This one I call electric Beethoven. I wanted to talk about in this piece the highlighter color versus a earthy mossy swamp color, and just pairing those two and what happens. That was my inspiration for this color combo, and I call it electric Beethoven because Beethoven is really like, his music is so powerful and it's so filled with a lot of contrast. So it'll be bold and thunderous, and then it's
Mhm.
so absolutely gentle and and without ever being falling apart or being too delicate. It's just got a purity in it. And one day I was playing a piece of Beethoven, the Passionata Sonata, which is very, the last movement of this piece is very intense, and just the effect that we can have through sounds, and even listening. When we listen on a deep level, we change. Every
Mhm.
piece of music, every classical piece of music is a transformative experience if we allow our hearts to be open. Because we begin this journey when we first start listening, and the first note, we are who we are. But at the end, it's like a great novel. We were talking about how we love classical literature, um, or any novel that really resonates with a beautiful theme, and it takes you through a transformational journey. A piece of music does that. Beethoven's Appassionata definitely does that. And so by the end, you're changed, you're transformed, you're a new person because you've gone through all these feelings and all these
Mhm.
emotions. So I'm playing this piece, and just my living room. It was a beautiful, starry, peaceful July evening. And I'll never forget that night because every star was out twinkling in the sky before I started playing this piece. And Beethoven was a man who loved nature. And no matter how bad the weather was, he was outside walking 3 hours a day. That's where he got his
Love it.
inspiration.
Yeah.
He would take
Yeah.
his notebook, he would walk through the woods, he would hear, like nature sounds, he would translate that into notes. And I mean, he was inspired so much by the majesty of nature. He loved thunderstorms, he loved storms, and you could hear that in his music. Anyway, so the last movement is a very stormy last movement, and I'm about to finish it, and suddenly I hear thunder. And I was like, maybe I was just hearing that, or but I was really in a zone. I remember that. And the piece finishes, and the next thing I hear rain against the window pane. I'm thinking, what? But it's like a cloudless sky outside. Janet, I looked outside my window, and across the street from me, cloudless, nothing. And over my house, there was a cloud over only our
Mhm.
house, a cloud, and it was a Beethoven cloud with, like, real big rain and thunder. And it made me realize, I mean, that with our hearts, with that sound realm, like, we can even have an impact on nature. I mean, I just truly feel like,
Oh, I believe that. Oh, yes, for
I mean, it
sure.
was unbelievable. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
incredible.
Wow. That's amazing. That is so great. And I so believe that what you say is true. Because of course it is. We have the power within us, creating in the way that we speak and through the
Yes.
sounds that we make.
Yes.
That is absolutely our birthright through Jesus Christ.
Yes.
So it was for the
Amen.
reason, and I think it's another one of those things that we haven't understood. And so, like, I was calling, for example, what I was on the phone with my retired pastor's wife one day and talking as I drove home and saw a rainbow just out of nowhere. I mean, there's nothing in the sky. There's just a little teeny tiny cloud-like rainbow in front of me as I'm driving home, and it's with me the entire journey until I get off on my exit. And I told her, I said, gave her a perspective. I said, you don't hear this in church. And she says, you really don't. And you don't hear what you've said today in church. But I think that there's a time that's coming. And actually, I think it's here where
Yes.
we no longer are content to accept the
Yes.
mediocre or the
No.
ways in which we have been, our understanding of who God is has been confined, lest it be called
Yes.
heresy, because that's not it at all. And I just feel like there's been this control on the part of the enemy to keep us from what is truly ours. And
Thank
we're
you.
over it. And by the way,
Yes.
I wore black today because I was thinking piano. But it's interesting that you mentioned, but it's, but, well, and because I had a lot going on and I've been house sitting and just got back, but I just felt like I was thinking piano, and before I came on, I thought, but everything about who I am and how I celebrate is color. And so it's
Mm.
interesting that it would be the, like, one of few times I think I wear the color black, but
Color
I love that you
changed.
know that and that you witnessed that because color has a vibration too.
Oh my God.
The world is
You know,
color.
I have to share this story about color with you because it's so powerful. The colors we wear and the frequency that that creates. So my testimony is that I was born Catholic and went to all the Catholic schools and stuff and high school. And when I left um, high school, I just really became a I just said, okay, I'm done, and I left the church and in New York living and going to school and music. It was a very different time then. It was like in the 80s and 90s, and it was just it was very secular, the music world. And even though I always had I knew God from a very young age. It wasn't the churchy God that was shown me in these Catholic settings that I was in. So I really kind of like got away. I got away pretty far, and
Mhm.
I then found myself married years later, and I just was like, I don't know. I was so empty. I think it was a form of spiritual bankruptcy. I just
Mhm.
was lost. And so my youngest daughter was turning 3. And so she was like at that age, like the terrible twos, like she was really a rambunctious 2-year old.
I had
And
one of those.
oh my gosh. I
Mhm.
thought, oh, my first was like so angelic, and the second one was like rambunctious. And like, I said, geez, I don't know if I'm cut out to like deal with this. And so she was, I don't know, like it was breakfast time. The phone rang. I turned my head for a second, and she went over to the stove and she pulled down a pot of boiling water. And
Oh
so the
goodness.
next thing, like, I mean, it was a nightmare. So we were rushed to the burn units where they dealt with all the 9/11 victims and firefighters at the hospital about 30 minutes away. And the prognosis was horrific, like that her skin was burned from her chin to her knees, and that she had second and third degree burns, that she would need enormous reconstructive surgeries plus skin grafts, plus she would never be able to like move her right arm fully because of the way the burn hit under the arm. And I had all sorts of ideas that she would play violin. So I did not like, I couldn't even believe like this was happening. And so that night, when like my husband and I were in the hospital room, and he left the room for a bit, and it was nighttime, and I see my daughter, and I can't even believe that life changed so fast, like in the blink of an eye, going from everything is fine, but I'm always like in my head, I was in such a dark, kind of depressed place. Like I didn't feel gratitude for life, and I was removed from Christ. I was gone. I was a goner, spiritually at that point. But in that moment at the hospital, seeing my daughter tied up to all these like tubes and life support systems, and she could have died because her body was starting to go into ketosis potentially. I In this like mental darkness I had, I just called out the only name that I knew. And like, trust you me, like I had experimented with all sorts of different types of religions during my foray away
Same.
from
Yeah.
church and God. And so I like to say that I like tasted from the smorgasbord of different things, but there was only one name that I cried out for in that moment of despair, and it was Jesus. And when I say like that feeling of the light coming into the darkness. It was so profound. And I barely knew like how, what the next step would be. But the next thing was prayer chains started around New Jersey, praying for my daughter Maya. And so we were supposed to stay in the hospital for 3 months, and or at least, several weeks. And we were out of there in less than a week. And after 6 months, there was not one scar or residue of this burn, not one on her body, to the point that the pediatrician asked, like, which one of your two kids is the one with the burn? I can't even tell. So it was a supernatural miracle. And so
Wow.
now fast forward, I'm trying to grapple with, what does life look like after something like this,
Mm.
and for myself, I was confused. I was still in a transitional phase. I couldn't really understand. So I had to go play a concert on the West Coast. So I got on a plane, and I wasn't used to flying that time with little kids by myself. So this was like, oh, I'm getting on a plane by myself, and I'm bringing my knitting. So I'm sitting in this like in the middle seat, and there's like two other people next to me, and this woman was next to me, and like I just right away I just thought she was cramping me. I just felt like it was like, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to like step over her to go to the bathroom, and I'm one of those people that goes to the bathroom 50 times during a flight, and I was ready, like kind of muttering in my head as I would, grumping me at that stage in my life. And anyway, I take out my knitting, the plane takes off. It's a 5-hour thing. And the plane takes off, and I start knitting, and I was knitting. I'll never forget the color, Janet, because the color was so profound. It was like a purplish pink. It was almost like shimmery. It was like nothing else. I actually created a color for my yarn, and I named it Wild Orchid based on that color I
Ooh.
was knitting with. Because the next thing, the lady next to me, without looking me in the eye, says, that is a beautiful color you're knitting with. It's a powerful color." And that intrigued me, that she associated color with a certain significance. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, it's the color of royalty. It's the color of angels." And I was like, "What?" But it was such an intriguing thing. That moment led to the next 5 hours where I'm convinced this was an angel, because she says to
Mm.
me, not no, we've never been introduced. She goes, at one point she goes, "Margaret, I know what happened to Maya, your daughter, and I'm here to tell you it's all going to be okay." And she proceeded to tell me things about my life, about my future, about the healing touch. She imparted to me what that is. And I'm crying for 5 hours. I don't even believe what's going on. Like, it was so
Mm.
intense. My life changed after that impartation. I got to my hotel room when I landed, and that night I thought I would die, because all that toxicity that I had accumulated over those years of my spiritual bankruptcy were leaving my body. And it was freaky, and it was scary, and I didn't think I'd survive it. But the next day, I woke up and I looked outside. It was a beautiful blue sky, and I knew that this was what it feels like to be reborn in Christ. And from that point on, life was never the same. It was so profound. But this to say that it was the color that was the thing that initiated that conversation.
I love it. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that with us. That is amazing. I'm thinking that is a book right there in and of itself.
Yeah.
That
I put
story.
it I put it in a book I wrote. I actually wrote a book about it's called Soli Deo Gloria, to God
Uh-huh.
the glory, the letters that Bach would write at the end of his compositions. And it's a book that has a CD, like when CDs were a thing, but it
Yeah.
has a digital audio component to it as well. And it really, I wanted to talk about the composer Bach from a spiritual perspective and his faith and his things about the way he composed in conjunction with nature and the divine fingerprint of God in numbers and sequence and things like that. So I do write about that story in the book.
That is awesome. So I'm going to have to check that out. And I marvel at, I heard, and I always use this, that there's no, your right brain is that side of your brain is what experiences the miracles and the supernatural. The left brain is obviously not, and that's not what I want to get into, but I just think that for me in my life, all of those little God moments that are so connected, just even when you're talking. Okay, let me give you an example. So I took piano when I was a kid, gave it up, but I remember we had those little tiny busts that stood about this tall,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
little
I
white
know
ones
those.
we used to acquire.
Yeah.
So we would acquire them if we did, I don't remember what the parameters were. We played so many or we did whatever recital or whatever. But my very first of very few busts was a little Bach bust. And I've never forgotten that. So here we are. And you think, I know, I would think, because the rational me says, the left brain side of me says, there is no way that there's any correlation with that little statue and this moment right now. Well, wait a minute. Maybe there is, because it's all about color and Bach. And so it's all coming back because let me tell you, color speak was not something that I even came up with.
Wow.
As a journalist and a teacher of literature, wouldn't I want to come up with something like Color Speaks? No, God said the name of this podcast is going to be Color Speak. That's just his thing. This is because we want to speak color. We want to be aware of color. And can you imagine living in a monotone world is what I always ponder. No, color is love. That's love for us. And
Yes.
then another moment I had, a God moment today talking to you, was I too, like you, went to the smorgasbord of, I mean, I did it all too. And so I think sometimes, we have to, God allows us to explore all of these other options. Somebody said to me recently, well, I don't have faith. I'm much too logical. And I'm thinking, my gosh, that's the why you should have faith,
Yes.
because it's the only thing that makes sense. And so then I would challenge you to, like I did, I left no stone unturned,
Yes.
because by golly, I was going to search things out and I was going to get to the truth, kind of like Lee Strobel did in his The Case
Yes.
of Christ, right? I
Right.
very much track with that. But I remember as a single mom of 4 children in San Diego, sitting on the floor of my room, just wailing, but being so consoled by music, by tones. And I'm not talking about the typical things that one would listen to on the radio at that time. I was drawn to the music of Enya and those kinds of things, but it was a different, obviously classical. My dad listened to classical music. I was such a brat when I was growing up, because he would always have it on classical and I would switch it. And
We all
now
do.
I realize what a brat I was. But
No.
anyway, it was that kind of music, but it was tones, is my point.
Yes.
But it
And
resonated and it felt like I just felt God through it. I couldn't describe
yes.
what was happening, but I just knew that it was something that made me feel connected to the spiritual, to the supernatural, to an understanding that there was something bigger than me, and that something loved me and protected me.
That's
And
so
eventually I
beautiful.
was led home and
Mhm.
I found Christ, which was radical. That was a radical time when I thought, oh my gosh, Jesus really is real. That was wild. And so, I've been just pursuing him ever since, as he pursues me. But
So
um,
amazing and beautiful. What and it's it's great because there's some people that their life tracks, that they have a like a very direct, like they're born, and churched all their life and they don't deviate. And I always am like, wow, that is,
yeah,
so much.
same.
It's wonderful, like to have that direct line, but
Mhm.
then there's some of us that take the detours and stuff. Now, you know there, I really appreciate one thing that you brought up, and I'm really also standing in faith for that, because it's something that I've seen too, and that there is a shift that's happened, and maybe it's this post COVID. I don't know what it is, but it's like more things are opening up, and I do believe that the Lord is revealing new things, uh, and that we shouldn't put God in a box. One of the things that I experienced pre-COVID was I was on a mission to take classical music back for kingdom purposes, because I always felt that secular world, the classical music world, is a very toxic world, believe it or not. I mean, what you see in operas and concert stages
Mhm.
is beautiful and lovely, but the dark underbelly is that it's like any business. It's a harsh business.
Mhm.
And I just thought that, this is such great music, and yet why is it only played in concert halls, and why is it only for like this assumption that you have to be educated to enjoy it, or something like that, or wealthy to enjoy it? And what about bringing it back to humanity and using it for the Lord? Because I always say, music, if we look at a score of Bach's music, for instance, and see the complexity and compare it to a chord chart that is used in a lot of church worship music these days, like, there's no comparison. I mean, there's no comparison.
Mhm.
This is just, I'm talking about complexity and design and pattern. So I say that, like, if we are the bride of Christ, and we have this music available to us, why are we not using it for that purpose of worshiping Him? Why are we, relegating it to concert halls where you have to pay $100 a seat, and you look in the program and it says nothing about God in it, So I was on a mission to try to bring this kind of programming back to churches as a extra program to have. And so the concept was the Soli Deo Gloria concerts, to God alone the glory, talking about the message of faith behind the classical music, followed by a performance of these pieces. And there's just so many amazing stories in this music of the hand of God working through the lives of these composers, and so many beautiful stories. But a lot of times, I'd get the message like, okay, we can't have this in church because of XYZ. And also, you can never use that word vibration or frequency in church because it's not, and a pastor told me this, Jesus-y enough, and it would turn
Oh,
off our
yeah.
confidence.
Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
so I've been accused of being extra biblical and all sorts of stuff.
New agey, probably.
Yeah, new agey, which this is not, but like, the devil does not create, only
That's what I was gonna
takes,
say.
right? It
Yeah, he's the
takes
counterfeit. This is all
counterfeit.
God's. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I love this topic, and I know we're going to have to wrap up. And I promised you earlier, we talked about it. Now I'm going to make my promise. We need to have you back. We need to hear more, because we're only touching the tip of the iceberg. But the conundrum is this. So I've been in a variety of different churches. We've explored different denominations in this house for various reasons, backgrounds coming together, what the kids wanted, large family, all of that. We've been in churches where they absolutely held to an old style of worship, but it was problematic for the average person to try to follow along or even hit the high notes. And so therefore it was a real turnoff. So the problem is coming into how do you educate the masses to be able to participate. I think that's largely why some of the contemporary music has worked, because the masses can participate in that and it feels more comfortable and less limiting for those who don't know. But I also think it's interesting that you have people on both sides, like on one side saying, if ever a contemporary note is hit in this church, I'm out of here. Or, those like you've mentioned, no vibrations. Or I think we need to come together and try to figure something out that's available for everyone. I mean, I love contemporary worship music. I absolutely do. But that doesn't mean that concurrently I can't enjoy what you're talking about, which is so beneficial that,
Yes.
would, yeah. And I think maybe it's just a matter of educating people. It's not just about adhering to the old ways because of divine
No,
order worship.
Correct. It
It's more
is
than that. Yeah,
education.
yeah, right.
Absolutely. And there's forms of music, right? That there's different types of uh, worship music. There's celebratory, there's the contemplative and things. I just think that it would be nice if there was space made for all sorts. And I also have
I
been,
agree.
jumping through, like leapfrogging from a lot of different churches, and also the same story, like, there's this type here and then there's that type there. And I just think that, just like we have so many layers of expression in the musical arts, that you know there can be, I think, a way where every type or genre could be included and not
Mhm.
segregated to, like, only this kind of church or only that. Like, I don't see why not. It can't all come together, and there can be some blending of genres going on. Maybe not at the same time in the same song, but, like, a program where you
Yeah.
have, okay, now bring on a more, old fashioned hymn, and now contemporary, and now, we'll go into something a little different, maybe from another culture or something. Like, I don't know, but there's so many, like,
Mhm.
there's so many colors. There's so much
Well, and
music.
as you're talking, I'm envisioning it. So we have a prayer room here in Kansas City, and music plays 24/7. Well, what if you had an opportunity for churches to do that, and churches set aside, okay, well, this is our prayer hour, or this is our healing hour, and during this time we're going to play healing music. And I loved what you said, contemplative. Let's have some contemplation, let's have some supplication, let's do all of the things and attach it to music and provide it to people. And I think people would come, as long as they were educated properly, they understood ahead of time this is what it's about. I think everybody would be on board, mostly.
There's nobody, we all have this understanding, the sensitivity. I think we're programmed for truth and beauty. We know what it is, and there's no education
Love
needed.
that.
If you see a beautiful flower, that's a beautiful flower. You don't have to know where it comes from or the origin or anything like that. And so I agree that just having the availability of it, and it's all about connecting. If we could
Mhm.
connect with the story or the message, like, we are people, as humans, we love stories. So if we could hear stories, like, okay, I've never heard this piece of music before, but tell me a story about it. Let me connect to it. And that way I'll be able to, then already my heart is open to it. It's such a nice idea, I think,
Mhm.
rather than, okay, we're going to listen to this concerto in E minor right now. Like, it doesn't
Right. You have
mean
to
anything.
share about it. And I love what you've done that to draw me in today. And I just always, I think about this. It's a football analogy with me. For many years, I was not into football. I really just wasn't. It didn't interest me. I knew people that played. My husband watched it. The kid, one or two of our children did, but it didn't. It wasn't as exciting until my husband sat us down and started giving us the backstory on all of the various players and the history of the leagues. And then all of a sudden it became tangible and personable and
Yes.
personal rather. And, oh, okay. Our kicker in Kansas City, he's a man of faith. I'm interested in that. I want to hear more about that. Those kinds of things that drew me in. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's about education. It's about just
Right.
letting people know. Once people know, well, gosh, if they, like anything in life, red dye 40 or whatever it is, not a good thing to give your kids. Take it out. Okay, well, now that I know that, I'm not going to buy those red cookies because they're not going to
Right.
be helpful.
Right.
So yeah, it's good. It's good stuff.
It is. It is for sure. Education. And
Yes,
yeah, just knowing. The more we know, the more we're, like you say, attuned, the better
yes.
off we'll be in the long run. Better choices we'll make for ourselves too.
I love it. Well, I want to have you back, Margaret, because I want you to tell
Sure.
me next time about the seven sacred tones. And maybe we'll even have you do a little playing. But I want to encourage people, and I want you to go ahead and mention, and I'll have it in the show notes too, but where they can listen to you, because I've seen some of your YouTube videos and they're fantastic.
Oh,
And I've
thanks.
listened to you play, and you're just brilliant.
Oh,
And so I would love to have you share that information with people, how they can find you. And I know that you even offer a golden tone workshop.
yes.
That's amazing. So
Yes.
yeah, tell us about it.
My YouTube channel is Margaret Wacyk, and on that channel, I have performances. I used to do a live stream during the COVID time. I was doing every Sunday a live stream combining a message, biblical word with music, and talking a lot about the composers. So that was my foray in the live stream department of bringing the world of Christian together with the classical. And yeah, and with the golden tone course, that is a course for pianists that I offer, especially since a lot of pianists suffer with tendonitis and issues with technique. I made into a course the key things that helped me when I had to really like re learn everything from scratch. And
Mm.
so, yeah, and it's really helped a lot of pianists around the world to rehabilitate their technique. And soon I am starting this spring intimate concerts with the Word of God, as you know, music again for prayer, healing, and
Mhm.
contemplation. And so I'm starting that in New Jersey very soon. If there's anybody who's local in your community and would like to come, you know, they're free to, you know, contact me. I'll give them details. But I have all my instruments tuned to these special frequencies, and so there's a lot of healing benefits in the live thing. You know, I think that's one thing that's sort of been lost as well, especially with
Mhm.
the, you know, pandemic and everything, is like the beauty of getting together and, you know, experiencing these things in a live format. So
Is
yeah.
that something you would ever do online as well for those that are interested that can't
Sure.
get to New Jersey?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, my ultimate goal is to bring it to different venues, and you
Mhm.
know, small venues, churches, or any, you know, any place where there is a hunger and a thirst for connecting with these kind of ancient healing modalities and the classical arts as a way to increase our wellness and to open our hearts to receive the message of the Lord.
Mhm. That's so beautiful. Well, Godspeed. And I wish you, I bless you in the name of Jesus that
Oh,
this will
thank
grow, because this is what people need. Absolutely. Well, if you ever come to Kansas City, let me know. Or if I ever
you.
hear of any way to have you here, I'll let you know.
Oh, thanks,
That sounds
Janet.
great.
Appreciated. So nice to be here. The time flew. We were laughing about it that I
I
said it.
know. I was saying, I know we could talk the rest of the day, but let's try to get it out early. And now I'm looking at the clock thinking, oh my gosh, you have to be somewhere here soon. So thank you for
Oh,
being
what
with me.
fun. Thank you so much, Janet. This has been a total joy. It's
Oh, it's been a joy for
incredible
me.
to
And thank
meet
you for
you.
the testimony of your daughter and her miraculous healing.
Yeah,
We didn't even
God is
touch on
so
that, but I'm assuming that there was some music involved because in your world, that's what it is. I mean, your prayer and your supplication, right, to the
good.
Lord, but all of it and how it developed in the prayer chain. And what a testimony. What a
Thank
beautiful
you so
testimony.
much. Yeah, God is so great. You know,
Yeah.
it's amazing, you know. It's just amazing that we can witness and bear witness to just the glory. It's incredible.
Mhm. We
Thank
can
you.
expect a miracle. I always say we can
Yeah.
expect a miracle every day,
Yes,
every single day.
every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I do want to have you back. And so until next time, I bid you a fond farewell. And the rest of you, thank you so much for listening to us today. I hope that what we said today will help you and maybe even change your world, because you're entitled to that birthright where you live in a place of holiness and expectation in the Lord, which includes wellness and all of it. So thank you again for joining us, and have a very good day. Until next time. Bye.